Question 2. What is a point cut, a joint point, an advice, an aspect, weaving? So although the question first asks about a point cut, I want to explain first a joint point, because in aspect-oriented programming, everything is executed around a joint point. So joint point is in aspect-oriented programming is a point in execution of the program in which behavior can be altered by aspect-oriented programming. In Spring aspect-oriented programming, a joint point is always method execution. So whenever one component is executing the method on another component, this is a joint point. Aspect-oriented programming as a concept and also AspectJ implementation of the aspect-oriented programming also supports additional joint point, like constructor execution, reference or field assignment, exception handling, execution of the advice, or the execution of the static initializers and object initializers. So let's go ahead, look into the code, and let's see what it means. Please go into the IntelliJ and open module 2 question 2. And inside this question, there is a runner class which creates the context from Spring, and then it fetches few beans and then interacts with them. So whenever we are executing a method, this is a joint point in Spring aspect-oriented programming. So each execution of the method from the external part of the component is considered a joint point. Now, bear in mind that a joint point cannot be execution of the method within the class. So, for example, if I would try to execute this method getExchangeRate from within this class, like for example something like this is called a self-invocation in aspect-oriented programming, and this is not supported by Spring aspect-oriented programming. Only execution of the method from outside of the component is supported. Now, since we already know what is a joint point, let's now define what is a point cut. So a point cut is an expression or the predicate that is used to match a joint point. It is a way for us to inform aspect-oriented programming in which part of the code we want to modify the behavior. So think about the point cut as some kind of information which part of the code to modify and when to inject our own pieces of the code, which are called the advices. And below I'm showing few examples of the point cut expression. We will have the detailed explanation of those point cut expressions in upcoming questions. For now, you can just go through it, just have some initial information about those, and those will be explained in the detail in one of the questions while checking all of the supported syntaxes by AspectJ expressions. The first one is the execution point cut expression, and this one matches a method execution. Then we have a match of all of the types within the package. We have also a match of all of the types annotated with the annotation. We have also match of the method execution that is annotated with the annotation. Match by the Spring name, by the method arguments, by arguments annotated with the annotation. We have a match by the this and by the target. This one will be clear after discussing the CGD proxy and JDK proxy with the limitations of both of those. And also we have a target with the annotation. So let's now look into the code. Inside the code, I'm showing the examples of the aspects, and within each of the aspect, I have written the examples of the annotation. You can go through all of those examples. Do not be alarmed if you do not understand everything. We will have a question related to the AspectJ expression, and we will go through those in the details. For now, let's keep in mind that the point cut expression, like for example this one, is a way for us to inform that we want to execute this method whenever the getExchange method from this class inside this package is executed. The next part of the question asks about the advice. So the advice is the additional behavior that we want to insert into the code at the joint point matched by the pointcut expression. So if we will look at this example, the advice will be this code over here. If we would go back into the IntelliJ, the advice, for example, would be something like this. The advice would be something like this. Or for example, something like this over here. Now keep in mind that the pointcut expression can be defined as inline pointcut expression, or you can define the pointcut first and then you can reuse this when creating the advice. So for example, over here I have a pointcut expression defined as transaction annotation pointcut, and this is only the pointcut expression, and then this is used to create the advice. But also, I do not need to do this way. I can use the inline pointcut expression. So over here, I'm defining the advice and also the pointcut expression at once. The next part of the question asks about the aspect. So the aspect is something that brings it all together. The aspect would be the pointcut expression with the advice. Also, the advice, the aspect in Spring aspect-oriented programming needs to be a bean. So either you need to create a bean with the usage of the component scanning. So in the example over here, I'm using the component scanning, and whenever this will execute, it will discover all of the components. And since also I have the aspect annotation, it will treat those as aspects. And it will automatically analyze all of the pointcuts defined and all of the advices defined. The next part of the question asks about the weaving. So the weaving is the point in time when the aspects are actually applied into our code. This is where all of the pointcut expressions are matched with the joint point, and whenever we have a match, the advices, or in other words, our code, is injected into those pieces of the code. We have three types of weaving: the compile time weaving, load time weaving, and the runtime weaving. Spring aspect programming uses runtime weaving. The first one, compile time weaving, is something that would be normally done by the Maven plugin. So whenever the code is being compiled and all of the source code Java classes are being compiled into .class files, all of the pointcut expressions are matched with the joint point, and the bytecode is being modified. So when you have the resulting jar, this resulting jar already have all of the aspects applied. The next one is called the load time weaving. So over here we are also modifying the bytecode. However, instead of doing this while the code is being compiled, we are doing this whenever the .class files from the jar files are being loaded by the class loaders. At this point, all of the code is being analyzed, all of the joint points are being matched with the pointcut expressions, and whenever we have a match, advice is applied. The last one is called the runtime weaving. This is something that Spring aspect-oriented programming is using. So whenever the Spring context is being created, all of the beans are being analyzed, and whenever we have a joint point that is matching the pointcut expression, the JDK proxy or CGDeep proxy is being created for all of the beans. This one is easy to observe during the runtime. So if we would create the breakpoints over here, and now I will execute this code in the debug mode, and we will see that actually I'm not interacting with the currency service, but instead all of those are being proxied. So the currency service is not type of the currency service, but instead this is a CGLib proxy. The currency repository, on the other hand, is also a proxy, but this is JDK proxy. So we will have the detailed explanation on the JDK proxy and the CGLib proxy. From the first part of this tutorial, you can remember that the JDK proxy is generated whenever the class is implementing the interface. So for example, the currency repository over here is a class, the currency repository imp is a class that implements the interface. And since I'm interacting with this bean through the interface, Spring has created a JDK proxy for me. So the rule of thumb is that whenever class implements at least one interface, Spring will create JDK proxy for this one. The currency service, on the other hand, has the CGLib proxy because the currency service does not implement any interface. And we will have the explanation on the JDK proxy and the CGLib proxy. For now, you just need to remember that for Spring aspect-oriented programming to work and for all of the advices to be injected, Spring uses the runtime weaving, and when the context is being created, for all of the beans that have a joint point that are matching the pointcut expressions, the JDK proxy or the CGLib proxy is being created. So now when I'm invoking this getExchangeRate method, actually I'm not invoking the method on the original class, but instead I'm invoking the method on the proxy. And this proxy under the hood will contain the reference to my will contain the original class, and in case of the JDK proxy, it will contain a reference to the original code, to the original class. So over here we can see that the target in the JDK proxy is the currency repositories imp. While in case of the CGLib, this class will actually extend my original class. So now when the code on the currency repository over here will be executed, so when I will go into this one, I'm not going directly into the class. Instead, first the method on the JDK proxy is being executed, and then the JDK proxy invokes the method on the target class. If you enjoyed this video and would like to retrieve explanation to other Spring exam topics, you can get a full Spring Professional Certification exam tutorial course by following the link in the description.